I've worked for the last 22 years for the Auckland City Mission, and the City Mission is an organisation that's probably had the most to do with people who live in poverty. And so over the last 22 years I have seen, really sadly, an increase in the number of people who are living in poverty in New Zealand, and an increase in the degree of poverty for what they are living in. And I guess I've resigned, so probably that says that I haven't actually been particularly successful at my job. It was of great despair to me that this just continues, and so I think we are at a time that both the government and other people are starting to look at what we can do differently. The interesting thing about New Zealand over the last 15 to 20 years is that we have focused very much on child poverty. And we spend a lot of time researching child poverty and talking about child poverty and raising the issues of child poverty, and that has been an enormously good thing that we've done. What we have neglected to do is to talk about families in poverty. And I very seldom, in the whole time I was in my job, saw children begging in our streets. I very seldom saw children who were totally by themselves with no support whatsoever, because if they are, the state will step in and support them. And yet we did no work whatsoever about families living in poverty. The other interesting thing, I think, is that policy is applied to people, and yet frequently, and I would have to say, frequently the policy makers in Wellington would have never ever spoken to a person who is affected by the poverty or by the policies that they have applied to them. And I'll give an example because it's one of my favourites, is we have a lovely policy that says that women on a benefit should be in work, and it's much better for them. And yet if you talk to many of the women who are struggling to have children cared for while they work in jobs at night, and they have no transport, and they leave their children in unsafe environments, and they earn minimum wage, and they're stressed and struggle the whole time, they would not say that work is making them free. And they wouldn't say that it's advancing their lives, and it wouldn't say it's help. So there's quite a distinction between what policy says is good for everybody and what the experience is for people. So a few years ago I decided that I was really concerned about the amount of food parcels that were increasing and the number of people we're seeing, and I thought one of the things we need to know is not why do people stay in poverty, because actually we can probably just give you that list really easily. What stops them from moving out of poverty? And so we decided that given the number of food parcels that just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing, and I just heard on the news that the City Mission's record levels, we decided that we needed to do some research that started to actually talk to our clients. So unusually for us, we decided we didn't want academics doing our research. A really good reason for that is because every time we've invited academics into our organisation, they define what they want to do. They also define where they want to publish. They decide how it's going to be done, and there's almost decided about the outcome before we get there. And we've been held to ransom so many times by researchers in our organisation and got nice little booklets that haven't been particularly useful to us, but I think have been useful to the researchers. So on this particular occasion we did a piece of research that we devised ourselves, and I sort of dreamed up. And we took 100 of our families. We have a database of 15,000 people, which we have kept for the last 20 years. So we have a very, very rich source of data, which, by the way, is the only data, not-for-profit data or any other data in New Zealand that is actually held in stats and IDI. So you can go into City Mission data and research it if you want to. So we said, let's take 100 families. Why 100? Well, I would say that I'm actually very mathematically challenged. 100 made my stats really easy to do. I would say I wanted a largish sample, because I didn't want it just to be about 4 families or 5 families. I wanted it to be over a period of time, because I wanted to know what was happening with families. So I did hire researchers. I hired researchers from 3 universities, and we had a year of arguments. Let's make it 5 families and 6 interviews, because then we could publish quicker. Let's do it quickly and find out. Let's just focus on this one point. And it took a long time to convince people that we were going to do a 12-month study. We were going to interview 100 families every 2 weeks. My staff were going to do the interviews, and the researchers would help us to define the questions that we were asking, and that we would tape all of those interviews. So we have hundreds of thousands of hours of tape, so if anybody's ever interested in coming in and looking at that research. And that we would do things differently to try and find out from families what it's like to live in poverty. First thing we did, and you won't be able to see this, is we determined that families are not what they seem. Okay? So if you go in for a benefit, and the benefits, you've got to fill in the form that says, here's my name and here's my children. Here's my children. And so we list the children. It doesn't list whether you're in a relationship, out of a relationship, if you're co-parenting, or you're co-parenting with 3 other people, or you're step-parenting, or what you're doing. So our whole idea of families actually doesn't really run true. And this is what we found from 100 people. And I know that, and probably stories around here, you know that. I might tell mine very quickly. This is a genogram. It's like a whakapapa, or a family tree, for those of you who are Māori who knows a whakapapa. Family tree. We drew one of these with all of our clients. And then we went back to their grandparents, we went forward to their children, we overlaid it with abuse issues, we overlaid it with violence issues, we overlaid it with justice issues. And what did we find? Children move from family to family to family. They move on weekends, they move for weeks, they move for months, they sometimes move for years, they get lost in the system, they're not tracked, and money is absolutely directed to parents, not to the children. And so for many times we see mothers who don't have enough money because they have more children than are listed on the work and income form, which still maintains its traditional way of collecting information. So that's the first thing we found. This is a different diagram that I have. One of the things we asked families was, who do you see? Who helps you? Who are you engaged with? This is a 2-week period for a family of 4 people. 2 weeks. 45, in case you couldn't count them. 45 agencies, churches, food banks, and some interesting things. Multiple food banks, because the food bank industry says you can get 6 food parcels a year. But when you've done your dash there, you have to go to another food bank. And every food bank says you have to go to budgeting, because the government funds budgeting, because that's policy. And so they go to 3 different budgeters, because the food bank says they have to. And so we have multiple budgeters, multiple food banks. You won't see it quite so well there, but there are what we call dotted lines, heavy lines. Dotted lines symbolise stressed relationships. The solid lines symbolise a good, healthy relationship where the client feel comfortable and they feel that the people treat them well. Just about everybody has a dotted line on most of those. Why? Because everywhere they go, they're treated badly. They're treated badly at the WINS office. They're treated badly at the Housing New Zealand office. They're treated badly when they go to the Justice Department. They're sometimes treated badly at church because they're not even good enough for churches. They're treated badly in food banks. One people who don't treat them badly are the people trying to sell them finance. You know? Those are the people who are nice to them. And actually around this whole circle of interrelationships that these families have, there is very seldom one agency that actually is a really good relationship. And actually, we would suggest that relationships are the very basis of life. I'm not sure how you make policy for this, but I am going to tell you how the system works at the moment. We say that the family in the middle, we could call them living in poverty. Sometimes people just say that family is really stuffed. You know? And we say this stuffed family actually goes to all these very stuffed agencies. And we have our new policy around, which is called navigators. And the navigators can take the stuffed people to the stuffed agencies. And they're usually only semi-stuffed, if you're lucky. So actually we have a system that just keeps perpetuating itself to keep this family where they are. Okay? So that's the second thing we learned. And this is, you know, one of 100 diagrams, pretty common. Pretty common. The next one, this is called a debt map. And I actually believe this is one of the biggest reasons for people in New Zealand not being able to move out of poverty. This is Amelia. Amelia's like every other one of the 100 maps that we've got. And when she was quite young, she got pregnant, and her partner said, "My mother doesn't have a car and she has no credit, will you sign the forms?" And she did. "We don't have a television, will you sign the form?" And she did. And you're all thinking, how stupid is this girl? Put your hands up if you've read your terms and agreed the conditions for your telephone. Well done. Put your hands up if you've read all your terms and agreements for Facebook. One, I used to get one. It's all right, I asked 250 data analytics the same questions the other day. I got one person who'd read Facebook, Google and his Spark account. No, he was the same person. And nobody else. So I can't say that she's stupid because she hasn't read complicated financial agreements. And she did a lot of them. And then he left. And so did the mother-in-law, which she thought was probably pretty good. But she was left with the children, she was left with the debt, and she had nowhere else to go to get money. Family's not going to support her because the family's so complicated, they're in debt, they're getting food parcels. And so she goes to the grocery trucks and to the other ones. She has no choice. Very, very typically for the families we see, even those who are living in social housing, be paying $100 in rent, but $400 in debt recovery every week. And of course it's unpayable. It's unpayable. And it's interesting because actually the new policy is about teaching these people, let me use that again, these people financial literacy. Because you know, if they're literate, they might go away. Actually, unless you start to think about some debt consolidation and not having that, families like this will never, ever, ever, ever move. Every nice thought you've got will never, ever work while families stay stuck in so much debt. But this is a picture really of how some of our families go around getting food. Day one, they've got their benefit, they've got enough money for food. By day three, that's gone, because they've usually only got $11 after their debt and everything's come out. And then they spend most of their time going around looking for food for the rest of the week. These families wake up in the morning and they spend 60% of their time food seeking. Now, while you're thinking about what you can do to change people's lives, if you spend 60% of your time thinking about getting food on your table, there is very, very little time left for anything else. And some international research would say that while you're doing that, and the rest of the time is probably about debt, while you're doing that, you are also losing cognitive function. And research says up to 17 IQ points. And you know this, if you're worried about somebody who's sick, if something going on in your life, if you had a relationship breakup, you know, it just sort of overwhelms you. And so you can't think of other things. So one of the things that really for me about changing poverty is actually thinking about what are the things that have to happen before you can start really making a difference in people's lives. And my premise is if they don't have adequate housing, if they don't have adequate food, and if they don't have a sustainable income, and we seem to focus on what they just get in rather than what goes out in debt, and I suggest until the government really thinks about what's left in people's pockets, not what we give in a benefit, that actually we're going to find it really difficult. We're going to find it difficult for them to concentrate on having their kids having good outcomes at school, and we're going to find it difficult for any of the other things that we actually try and do to actually work. Just one last thing I'll leave you with is a wonderful program in Tamaki, school program, that actually every child when they come to school, DSL1 school, has a computer, and they have a philosophy of making their children progress 1.5 years every year, right? And I thought, oh, this is good, eh? These kids are going to be bright as sparks. Reason why? Because over the holidays, they lose at least half a year's work. So while a child from a good home will actually keep learning during the holidays, a child from a mediocre sort of place will just maintain. A child who's living in a household where there's no food, where there's violence, where there's not warmth and there's not safety, will actually regress. So when you think about education policies, you need to start to think about those things. For the actual people living in poverty, it's a very, very, very miserable existence. It's 90% of these are women. They don't have partners who support them, and they do the very, very best they can. And I think we should remember, whenever we think about policies, that policy is around people. And at the end of the day, whatever we do, we should always consult and talk with the people about what they think is best for them, about what would work for them, and also about how our policies are affecting them. Thank you. Well, I have to say I'm unemployed at the moment. So well, actually, no, I'm not quite. I've changed sides. I'm working for the government. I'm chairing the Data Future Boards, which is actually very much concentrating on looking at how we can use data, and particularly working with advising with Treasury at the moment about social investment model. And looking at, so a lot of those models we'll be looking at, but I guess from my perspective it's always how these policies are going to impact on families. But I think there's a lot of ways that we can look at. One of the problems I think we do is we pepper pot little ideas, and we haven't really yet decided what are the big things that will really work to make change. I don't think it's not actually anybody's fault as such. Agencies are set up and they have a series of rules, and we've had a welfare system that many in the world would envy. It's just it doesn't work in the same way that it used to, and there is so many guidelines about what people can do and what they can't. In fact, you know, everybody's in a little box, not being able to sort of move outside of that. Well, we did do navigating, but then I think, what was the purpose of spending a lot of money taking families to systems that should be working for them, not working for them? And so I actually began to think we were facilitating agencies to stay the same, rather than thinking about how can we do this differently. And look, we're in a new world. I'm not sure why people have to go and line up in a work and income office or a WINS office for a special needs grant of $200, and there needs to be a building and an infrastructure and a person when I can do my banking online. I'm just not sure that technology couldn't replace a lot of the processes that we're doing with people, and then we could use people to deal with the more difficult issues. Yes? Yep.
It is. Okay.
Yep. And I think one of the things we don't think about, we all sort of think that perhaps they're not competent, they're not capable. You try navigating that system. You know, they're highly skilled at navigating that system. And in the same way, try sleeping rough for a few nights. It actually takes a high skill level to do that. What we've done is made that all into negative interactions rather than into positive reactions. And that's the system that's just developed over a period of time. Look, when we did this work, we actually changed the way that we did, we've done food parcels, we've embedded in agencies, we've worked with agencies differently. Certainly, the Mission does a lot of work along a lot of organisations. Game changers though, I think City Mission was the one that raised the issue of child poverty in New Zealand. We're the first organisation to do that. We did that with an advertisement called Discover Auckland. I didn't realise that somebody was going out with another Discover Auckland that was slightly different to mine a couple of weeks later, and the tourism board weren't very happy with me. But it certainly raised the issue. And actually a lot of this Family 100 work has been, the Minister of Finance carries some of these around and says this has been some of the influential work on looking at systems and poverty in New Zealand as well. So I think we've done some game-changing things.